Black maid slept in the living room with baby. Millionaire saw and made a shocking choice. If someone had told me that a simple return home would change everything, I would have laughed in their face. The mansion's electronic. Gates slid open with a deep metallic sound. A shiny black Tesla rolled slowly into the garage, reflecting the orange and gold hues of the Los Angeles sunset. The wheels came to a stop on the spotless polished concrete floor. Brandon Ellsworth, 38, stepped out of the car. His custom-tailored navy blue suit framed his athletic build. On his wrist, a Rolex Oyster Perpetual gleamed under the warm afternoon light. His Italian leather shoes made a crisp sound against the marble entryway. Despite his flawless appearance, there was a heaviness in his gaze, the fatigue of a man who had spent the entire day surrounded by numbers, contracts, and insincere people. The mansion's foyer was strangely silent. No ambient music drifting from the built-in speakers. Only the precise ticking of a Swiss wall clock. A subtle scent of jasmine lingered in the air, mixed with a faint aroma of polished wood. He walked, step by step, down the hallway leading to the main room. The door was only slightly ajar, allowing a thin beam of soft light to escape. Brandon touched the wood with his fingertips and pushed it open slowly. And then he froze. On the cream-colored shag rug, Amara Johnson, radiant chocolate-toned skin, long perfectly defined curls cascading over her shoulder, lay asleep. Her slightly curved body formed a natural shelter for little Ellie, just 1 year old, resting on her chest. Toys were scattered like a field of bright colors. Building blocks, dolls, stuffed animals. An open children's book revealed illustrations scribbled over with crayon. Non-toxic paint smudges marked Amara's hands, and a small piece of green modeling clay clung to her arm. Even in sleep, Amara's face showed signs of exhaustion. Her long eyelashes cast soft shadows across her cheekbones. Ellie, cheek pressed to her chest, breathed slowly and deeply, letting out tiny sighs. Brandon stepped closer without making a sound, feeling the soft rug beneath his feet. He knelt down as though afraid any sudden movement would shatter the magic of the scene. For a moment, the cold, calculating businessman was gone. What remained was just a father, mesmerized by the image of a home he had never known. But the moment was broken. A sharp sound echoed behind him. Firm footsteps. Mr. Ellsworth. This is not appropriate. Mrs. Whitaker's cold, controlled voice sliced through the air. Brandon turned slowly, narrowing his eyes. What do you mean by that? He asked, keeping his tone low. The employee sleeping on the living room floor with your daughter will cause talk. He clenched his jaw but kept calm. She's not just an employee, but the world will treat her as such, Whitaker replied, tilting her chin slightly, as though certain she was merely stating an inconvenient truth. The silence became almost tangible. Ellie stirred, letting out a small murmur, and Brandon looked at his daughter, then at Amara, as if, in that instant, he were choosing between the cold rules of the world and the pull of his heart. He rose slowly, adjusted his suit as if putting on armor. Mrs. Whitaker, from today on, no one in this house touches her without going through me. The housekeeper's gaze hardened, but she said nothing. Brandon walked to the window. Outside, at the end of the street, a black car sat parked. In the driver's seat, a motionless figure watched the mansion intently. Brandon narrowed his eyes. He knew that face. The mysterious car was still there when Brandon slowly stepped back from the window. The dark paint reflected only fragments of the streetlights, hiding most of the interior. The figure in the driver's seat remained still, as if part of the car itself, but the little that could be seen, a rigid outline. The barely perceptible tilt of the head, gave the impression they were tracking every detail inside the mansion. There was something in their posture that was not mere curiosity, but surveillance. Brandon kept his eyes fixed for a few more seconds, trying to make sense of it, before pulling the curtain closed and taking a deep breath. He needed to return to his routine, but the image stayed burned in his mind like a painting that refuses to fade. In the days that followed, while trying to maintain his usual pace of meetings and commitments, Brandon began to notice something he had previously overlooked: Amara. It wasn't just the almost artisanal care with which she tended to Ellie. It was the way her laughter, her calm demeanor, and even her gentle walk filled the spaces, transforming the house. The mansion, once as silent and cold as a luxury office, began to feel alive with sounds, scents, and small signs that love was circulating through those halls. One morning, while ending a video conference in his home office, a sound from beyond. The door made him stop. It wasn't a TV or music. It was a child's laughter, bright, clear, and contagious. A sound he had almost forgotten. He set the laptop aside and walked quietly down the hall to the playroom. Ellie, who just weeks before had crawled hesitantly, was now moving confidently across the colorful rug, her face slightly sweaty and fine strands of hair sticking to her forehead. Amara knelt in front of her, leaning forward to encourage her. Her smile lit up her face, and her eyes sparkled as though each small step were a major triumph. "That's it, my princess. Just one more block and we're there," Amara said, clapping softly, her voice full of pride. Brandon stood in the doorway, motionless, as if any movement might disturb the moment. He felt a tightness in his chest, but it wasn't pain. It was a complex mix of pride, gratitude, and something he couldn't name. The next morning at breakfast, when he walked into the kitchen, he found a scribbled piece of paper on the table. In the center, a child's drawing showed a man, a woman, and a child holding hands, surrounded by colorful strokes meant to be the sun and flowers. In the corner, in big uneven letters, it read, "For Daddy, made with Amara." Brandon picked it up carefully, as though his touch might smudge the ink. "You helped Ellie make this?" he asked when Amara walked in, carrying a bowl of fresh fruit. She smiled, a trace of shyness in her eyes. "She told me she wanted to give you a gift. I just helped with the colors." For a few seconds, the silence was almost palpable. Brandon's eyes locked on hers, as if trying to find, beyond gratitude, a meaning that went beyond words. "Thank you," he said, his low voice almost revealing more than he wanted to. But, as the days passed, he noticed an uncomfortable detail. The feeling growing inside him wasn't just gratitude. There was something deeper, something he tried to suppress, always reminding himself of the invisible barrier between them, boss and employee, worlds apart by nature. One night, close to 10 o'clock, Brandon was walking down the hall when he heard a gentle melody. He recognized Amara's voice singing to Ellie. The music floated softly through the floor, wrapping the space in an almost hypnotic calm. He leaned against the wall and closed his eyes for a moment, letting himself feel that peace. When he opened them, he realized he wasn't alone. At the other end of the hall, standing in the shadows, was Julian Torres, the company's attorney. The man was watching him with a slight smile. "She has a gift, doesn't she?" Julian said, almost conspiratorially. Brandon frowned. "What are you doing here at this hour?" "Company matter. But it seems your priority right now isn't exactly work." Brandon didn't answer, but the insinuation lingered in the air like smoke. And for the first time, he sensed he wouldn't be the only one interested in winning Amara's heart. From inside the room, Ellie let out a loud burst of laughter. Brandon and Julian exchanged a quick look, not one of friendship, but of silent alert. And in that instant, without needing words, they both understood. The game had begun. The night of the charity event arrived with a nearly blinding brilliance, the kind that makes everything look like a magazine spread. The mansion's imposing facade was lit by golden spotlights, highlighting every architectural detail. In the garden, lanterns hung from the trees, creating points of light that mingled with the delicate scent of jasmine. Inside, tall arrangements of white orchids dominated the tables, while the constant murmur of well-articulated voices blended with the soft sound of a string quartet playing discreetly in a corner of the main hall. Impeccably dressed waiters moved through the corridors, balancing trays of French champagne flutes, their bubbles rising in a silent ballet under the lights. Amara wore a simple black dress with a perfect fit that enhanced her upright posture and elegant bearing. Her curly hair, carefully pulled into a low bun, revealed the delicate outline of her face and the natural glow of her skin. She moved with discretion and precision, as if each step were calculated to place her in exactly the right spot at the right time, ensuring that every guest was attended to without her presence ever feeling intrusive. Brandon, dressed in a custom-tailored charcoal, gray suit and silk tie, was speaking with a senator and two influential businessmen. Despite the steady tone of the conversation, his eyes drifted toward Amara more often than he would have liked to admit, following her from a distance. The moment of sophistication was abruptly interrupted in the middle of a toast when a sharp voice rang out over the clinking of glasses. "My ring. My ring is gone," shouted Victoria Langford, a socialite known for her arrogance and appearances in the priciest luxury magazine columns. The entire room fell silent as if someone had pressed an invisible button. Victoria, tall, impeccably poised, and with perfectly aligned blonde hair, wore a tight red dress that drew attention wherever she went. Her sharp gaze swept across the room until it stopped, accusatory, on Amara. "I saw you near my purse." No one else touched it. A murmur began instantly. Small groups exchanged quick glances and muffled whispers, thickening the atmosphere. Amara froze, her eyes wide, not understanding how such an accusation had even arisen. "Excuse me, are you saying that I—" "Don't pretend to be innocent. It's always the same, isn't it? People like you think no one will notice." The words carried something far heavier than a simple accusation, blatant prejudice. An instant judgment based on the color of her skin and her social position. Amara's face burned, and she couldn't tell if it was from shame or indignation. "I would never touch anything of yours," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite her racing heart. Victoria took a step forward, her stiletto heel echoing against the marble floor. "Then prove it. Show me your purse." All eyes turned to Brandon, expecting him to step in. He started to open his mouth, but hesitated. The fear of turning the night into a public scandal froze him. For Amara, that second of silence felt as though it stretched for a century. She looked at him, searching for even the slightest show of support. All she found was a tense, calculating expression, as if he were weighing each word he might say. His lack of defense cut deeper than any direct insult. A guest murmured something in the background, and the chain of whispers spread like electricity. Though low, the sound was deafening. Amara clutched her purse to her body, feeling her palms grow damp. "If you want to look, you can," she said, her voice trembling more from hurt than fear. Victoria opened the purse without ceremony, rummaging through the few personal items. She found nothing. But instead of apologizing, she lifted her chin with arrogance and said, "Perhaps someone already took it." The embarrassment lingered in the air like thick smoke. No one dared confront the socialite. Brandon, his expression rigid, simply resumed his conversation with the senator, trying to end the matter as if nothing had happened. Inside, Amara felt something had broken beyond repair. As she walked away toward the kitchen, she passed Julian, who had been watching everything from a distance. He leaned in slightly and whispered, "I'm going to find out the truth." Her gaze, still wounded, gained a trace of hope. But along with that spark came an uncomfortable certainty. That night, some of the trust she had placed in Brandon was gone. Across the room, Victoria was fixing her lipstick in a small mirror, and as she closed her purse, Amara swore she caught a familiar glint inside, a reflection that looked suspiciously like the missing ring. A glint that could change everything, if she could prove it. Amara stayed in the kitchen, washing a glass that was already clean over and over, just to keep her hands busy and hide the tremor in her fingers. Warm water ran slowly over the glass surface, but she barely noticed. Her mind replayed the scene, like a scratched record. Victoria accusing her with that cutting voice, the stares slicing into her like sharp blades, and Brandon's silence, a heavy silence that hurt more than any spoken word. The side door opened quietly, revealing Julian. His blazer was unbuttoned, the knot of his tie slightly loosened, and his steady gaze carried a determination that contrasted sharply with the stifling atmosphere of the ballroom. He closed the door behind him, muffling the distant murmur and fala drutavanozum, creating an almost physical barrier between her and the world that had judged her. "I saw everything," he said plainly, his voice low but firm. Amara looked away, feeling the weight of his words. "Then you also saw that no one defended." Julian took a few steps forward, resting his hands on the cold marble counter, leaning slightly so he was in her line of sight. "I'm not no one, and I'm going to do something about it." She lifted her eyes, confused and incredulous. "Julian, you don't have to. People like that always find a way to come out on top," he replied in a tone that left no room for doubt. "Not with me. I give you my word." Without waiting for a response, he turned and went back into the ballroom. Amara stood still, watching him blend into the crowd with the ease of someone who knew every step of the social dance. It was like watching an actor step onto the stage at exactly the right moment. As the classical music continued, he discreetly approached the table where Victoria had left her purse. With the skill of someone who knew how to move unnoticed, he began a conversation with a small nearby group, always keeping the corner of his eye on the object. Later that night, in the now empty parking lot, Julian got into his car and, with a quick motion, opened the glove compartment. He took out a small flash drive and put it away carefully. Inside were the recordings from the mansion's internal security cameras. The footage clearly showed Victoria, alone, opening her own purse and placing the ring inside before creating the commotion that had humiliated Amara. Hours later, in the wood-paneled library lit only by a table lamp, Brandon was reviewing documents. When Julian walked in without knocking, crossing the room to the desk, he placed the flash drive on the mahogany surface with a controlled gesture full of meaning. "It's all there," he said, his voice firm with a hint of challenge. Brandon looked at the object, then up at Julian. "What is this?" "Proof that Victoria lied. The ring never left her purse." Brandon's brow furrowed, tension etched in his face. "Are you sure?" Julian let a half-smile escape, without a trace of hesitation. "More sure than you were when you decided not to open your mouth to defend her." The silence between them was thick, weighted with everything unsaid. Brandon looked away, but there was no avoiding it. The message was clear. Julian wasn't afraid to confront his own boss. At the end of the night, Julian found Amara sitting on the back steps of the mansion, bathed in the soft light of the garden lamps. She gazed at the lawn as if searching for some refuge from the day she had endured. He sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "You're in the clear, Amara. The ring never left her purse," he said, in a calm but firm tone. She took a deep breath, her eyes glistening. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did. Because no one deserves to carry a guilt that isn't theirs." Amara held his gaze for a few seconds. In that moment, she saw not just the company lawyer, but an ally. For the first time since she had set foot in that house, she didn't feel completely alone. On the other side of the property, a still silhouette stood out in the second-floor window. Brandon watched without blinking. And as the scene unfolded below, he couldn't decide what bothered him more, Julian's constant presence or the gratitude written across Amara's face. Brandon had spent the entire day trying to focus on work, but the memory of the flash drive Julian had left on his desk still pulsed like a persistent beat in his mind. The truth about the ring had cleared Amara's name, bringing relief, but it had also revealed something unsettling. Julian was getting close to her in a way Brandon had never allowed anyone to. That realization bothered him in a way he couldn't explain, as if, for the first time, a part of his life was slipping beyond his control. By late afternoon, he was climbing the wide staircase to the office on the mansion's second floor. The spacious, sophisticated room was filled with tall bookshelves lined with business books and corporate trophies, framed diplomas, and a faint scent of polished wood. The curtains were open, and the golden light of the setting sun streamed through the glass, painting the floor with warm, elongated reflections. Brandon walked to the desk, but before sitting down, a soft, almost musical sound caught his attention: laughter. Instinctively, he went to the window. Down in the perfectly manicured garden, Amara was sitting on the grass, her curls slightly tousled by the wind, holding Ellie in her lap. The little girl was laughing with an innocence that filled the air. Julian was crouched in front of them, trying to hold the baby the way Amara was showing him. "Support her head like this?" "Yes, gently," she said, her gesture both firm and full of tenderness, guiding his hands. Julian laughed aloud when Ellie's tiny, curious hand grabbed his nose. "I think she already likes me," he said playfully. Amara smiled, and that smile seemed to brighten more than the sun itself as it sank on the horizon, warming the moment in a way that felt almost tangible. Brandon felt his body tense. It wasn't just discomfort. It was a jealousy he didn't know how to handle, a new corrosive feeling that rose like a knot in his throat. Suddenly, he realized he was watching a moment that didn't belong to him. He yanked the curtain closed, as if to cut the scene from his mind, but not fast enough to keep the image from engraving itself clearly. Amara laughing with Julian, in perfect harmony, as if he were part of that small family. He tried to return to his desk, but the echo of their laughter seemed to run through every corner of his head. He picked up his phone, typed a message to Amara, and deleted it before sending. He didn't want to seem vulnerable. He couldn't allow himself that. Later, at dinner in the chandelier-lit dining room, he couldn't resist. "I see you and Julian are spending quite a bit of time together," he remarked, trying to keep his tone neutral but betraying a slight weight in his voice. Amara looked up, surprised by the question. "He's been kind to me." And to Ellie, "I think we all need friends, don't we?" Brandon gripped his fork tightly, as if the metal could absorb his tension. "I just hope you don't forget who's really here for you." She met his eyes calmly, holding his gaze without backing down. "Sometimes, being here doesn't just mean being physically present, Brandon. Her reply hit him harder than he cared to admit. Brandon finished dinner in silence, but inside was a storm. For the first time in his life, he feared losing something, or rather, someone who could neither be bought nor controlled. Outside, in the discreet darkness of the street, Julian studied the mansion's illuminated facade before getting into his car. He hadn't heard the conversation, but he knew from the atmosphere and from the look Brandon had given earlier that his closeness to Amara was getting under his boss's skin. And deep down, that realization didn't push him away. On the contrary, it only motivated him more. The tension between Brandon and Julian still lingered in the air like an invisible electric current, but the household routine seemed, little by little, to return to normal. Ellie was smiling easily again, her eyes bright during playtime, and Amara resumed her afternoons in the garden, spreading colorful toys across the grass while the little girl laughed. Even dinners, once silent and heavy, began to carry a lighter tone, with casual conversation and an air of normalcy that everyone pretended to believe. But the calm didn't last. On a clear morning, with sunlight streaming directly over the white columns at the entrance, the mansion's electronic gate opened slowly to admit a silver imported car, its engine purring with authority. The door opened, and with the confidence of someone who knows exactly the impact she makes, Vanessa Ellsworth, Brandon's ex-wife, stepped out. Tall, slender, her straight blonde hair falling like silk over her shoulders, she wore oversized sunglasses large enough to hide but not soften the calculating gaze she always carried. She was dressed in an immaculate white suit that contrasted with the cold gleam of her heels, their steps echoing on the marble floor like a warning of an impending storm. Brandon was in his office reviewing documents when he heard her voice ring through the hall with cutting clarity. "Brandon, we need to talk. It's urgent." He stepped out, already tense, closing the folder in his hands as if it were a shield. "What do you want, Vanessa?" She removed her sunglasses slowly, revealing a cold, precise smile, the kind that never heralded anything good. "Our daughter." Brandon crossed his arms firmly. "You abandoned her. You're not coming back now as if nothing happened." "Don't start preaching to me," she said, her voice laced with venom and certainty. "I have my rights, and a lawyer who knows exactly how to use them." Then she dropped the bomb with the ease of someone aiming for the most vulnerable point. "By the way, what's this I hear about you having a romance with the maid? That's going to look wonderful in court." Brandon frowned, anger rising alongside disbelief. "Don't make things up." Vanessa stepped closer, lowering her voice as if sharing a dangerous secret. "Oh, but I don't have to make it up. I already have photos. And in a few hours, the whole country will see them." That afternoon, as she had promised, gossip sites exploded. Headlines in giant letters flooded screens. "Billionaire CEO in romance with nanny. Amara Johnson. True love or gold digger?" The photos, taken from a distance with powerful lenses, showed Amara holding Ellie in her arms, smiling tenderly. Others, staged to suggest intimacy, caught her getting into Brandon's car, her hand on the door as if in a gesture of closeness. The impact was immediate and cruel. While retrieving the mail, Amara felt the weight of stares slicing into her like sharp blades. Two neighbors, standing by the hedge, whispered to each other while watching her, clutching their handbags to their bodies as if they needed protection. One leaned toward the other, whispered something, and both laughed discreetly, but the sound seemed to echo far too loudly in Amara's ears. Back inside the mansion, she entered through the side door, fighting to hold back the tears threatening to fall. The kitchen was silent when Brandon came in right behind her. "Amara, don't pay attention to this. I'll take care of it." She stepped back, keeping her distance. "Take care of it?" Do you know what people are saying about me? About my dignity? Brandon, this isn't just about you and your ex-wife. It's about how the world sees me. He took a step forward, but she raised her hand, stopping any approach. I've been judged before, but never with a child involved. I don't know if I can go through this again. Brandon realized that, for the first time, she wasn't just hurt, she was on the verge of a decision. And deep down, he knew Vanessa would stop at nothing to make sure that decision meant leaving. While he searched for words, his phone vibrated on the counter, breaking the silence. Brandon picked it up and saw an anonymous message on the screen. Just one short sentence, but heavy with threat. You have no idea what's coming. Brandon's phone was still buzzing on the counter when Amara left the kitchen and went upstairs to the guest room. She closed the door slowly, as if she didn't want anyone to know she was there. But her quickened breathing and the weight in her chest betrayed that this night would be unlike any other. She sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the small suitcase in the corner. For a moment, she ran her hand over the fabric, imagining what would fit inside. With each new article published, with every distorted photo, the world seemed to reduce her story to a cruel stereotype. When Brandon entered the room, he found her silent, staring into nothing. Amara, please tell me you're not thinking what I think you are. She didn't lift her eyes. I can't stay here anymore. Don't say that. You've done nothing wrong. It's my ex-wife who's manipulating everything. She drew a deep breath. Brandon, if I stay, she'll use it against you in court. You could lose, Ellie. I'm not going to be the reason you lose your daughter. He took a step closer, his voice firm but heavy with desperation. You think I'm just going to let you walk away like this? After everything you've done for me and my daughter? This isn't about wanting, it's about protecting. Brandon moved even closer, as though his physical presence could stop her from following through with her decision. But before he could say anything else, there was a gentle knock at the door. Julian stepped in, carrying a folder and wearing a serious expression. I've already found you a job, Amara, in Seattle. It's safe, far from this mess, and I can personally arrange a place for you to stay. Brandon turned to him, incredulous. You're helping her leave? Julian kept his tone calm. I'm helping to protect her. Amara looked at both men, feeling her heart break. Brandon was the home she had never imagined having, but Julian was offering a chance to start over without fear. Her hands trembled as she closed the suitcase. I'll never forget what you've both done for me. But right now, I need to do this for myself. And for Ellie. Brandon tried to speak, but his voice failed. He stood still, watching as she walked past him and out of the room, taking not just the suitcase, but something he wasn't sure he could ever get back, the presence that turned his house into a home. At the mansion's front door, before getting into the car with Julian, Amara looked back. Brandon stood at the top of the staircase, motionless, and for an instant, he seemed ready to come running down. But he didn't move. The car pulled away and the sound of the engine blended with the heavy silence left behind. The morning of the hearing dawned gray, as if the sky reflected the tension hanging in the air. Brandon arrived early at the courthouse in a flawless black suit and sober tie, but his face betrayed sleepless nights. Vanessa, his ex-wife, appeared shortly after in a sophisticated navy blue dress, accompanied by a tall, sharp-tongued lawyer, known for winning battles at any cost. Amara was in the hallway, sitting alone, wearing a simple cream blazer and her hair neatly tied back. She tried to keep her composure, but every time someone walked by and looked at her, her heart tightened. Brandon saw her, but she turned her gaze away, not out of coldness, but to protect herself from what she still felt. The courtroom was silent as everyone took their seats. The judge, A middle-aged man with a stern expression opened the proceedings. Vanessa's lawyer was the first to speak, his voice full of theatrics. "Your Honor, this is not just about child custody. It's about assessing the moral and emotional stability of Mr. Ellsworth. We have proof that he is maintaining an inappropriate relationship with Ms. Amara Johnson, an employee hired to care for the minor." Vanessa crossed her legs slowly, with a satisfied smile, as photos of Amara holding Ellie in the garden and getting into Brandon's car appeared on the courtroom screen. The images, though innocent, had been chosen to tell a different story. "These photos, Your Honor, show intimacy beyond the professional. Intimacy that could confuse the child and place her in an unstable environment." Amara lowered her head, feeling each word as a blow. Brandon clenched his fists on the table. The judge looked at him. "Mr. Ellsworth, do you have anything to say?" There was a pause. Brandon took a deep breath and stood, feeling every eye on him. "Yes, I do." His voice was steady but charged with emotion. He looked first at Vanessa, then at the judge. "Amara is the only reason my daughter smiles again. When her mother left, Ellie cried every night. I could buy her any toy, any treatment, but nothing made her stop. Until Amara came into our lives." He paused, and the silence in the room deepened. "She isn't just my daughter's nanny. She's the one who gave her back the safety of a warm embrace, the joy of playing, the confidence to sleep peacefully. She is the family my daughter deserves." The courtroom stayed in absolute silence. The judge studied him intently, while a few people exchanged discreet glances. Amara moved, felt a tear escape, but quickly wiped it away. Vanessa's lawyer tried to respond, but the weight of those words had shifted the balance. Brandon hadn't just defended his right to custody. He had confessed, in front of everyone, something he hadn't even admitted aloud to himself. Vanessa looked at him with masked anger, realizing that her narrative was beginning to crumble. But she still had cards to play, and the glint in her eyes made it clear she wouldn't back down. The sharp sound of the judge's gavel still echoed in Amara's head as she left the courtroom. The hallway was crowded with cameras, reporters, and onlookers. Each flash felt like a burst of light exposing more than she wanted to show. With quick steps, she pushed through the chaos, feeling the weight of every stare. Julian was waiting outside, away from the commotion, leaning against one of the building's columns. He was without a tie, his blazer slung over his arm, and his expression was a mix of concern and determination. When she approached, he made space for her to breathe. "Amara, this isn't going to stop. Even if you win, they'll keep coming after your image. I can get you out of here right now. A new job, another city, peace." She closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing his words. The idea of starting over far away was tempting, but it also carried an emptiness. Before she could answer, she felt a chill at the back of her neck. Someone was approaching. Brandon appeared at the top of the courthouse steps. He didn't have the cold demeanor of a CEO or his usual calculated posture. His dark suit looked heavier, his tie slightly loosened. He walked down each step slowly, as if buying time to find the right words. When he stopped in front of her, he didn't look at Julian. His eyes stayed fixed on hers. "I don't want you to be just my daughter's nanny," he said, his voice low but firm, carrying something he rarely let slip. "I want you to be the woman of my life." Amara felt her heartbeat quicken. Part of her wanted to believe him, but another part remembered all the times he had hesitated, all the weight that came with his last name and the world that wasn't hers. She took a deep breath, keeping her gaze steady. "And I don't want to be loved out of pity, but for who I am." Brandon took a step forward, But she stepped back, not out of fear, but to make it clear that words alone would not be enough. Julian, silent, observed, and for the first time seemed to realize that the choice was not truly in his hands. The afternoon breeze lifted a few strands of Amara's hair. She looked at Brandon, then at Julian. She knew that any decision would change everything. And before either of them could speak, a phone rang, hers. When she answered, the voice on the other end was urgent. "Amara, you need to come back." "It's about Ellie." Amara rushed to the hospital as soon as she hung up. The white cold corridor seemed to stretch endlessly toward the door of the room. When she entered, she found Ellie sleeping peacefully with a small bandage on her forehead. The doctor explained it had just been a minor fall at the playground, nothing serious. Even so, the scare had shaken everyone. Brandon was beside the bed, holding his daughter's hand and looking at Amara as if, in that moment, he knew for certain that he never wanted to live without her again. Time passed. Months later, the picture was different. The legal battle was behind them. Vanessa had retreated, realizing she would not win. And Amara and Brandon were together, no longer as employer and employee, but as life partners. They lived under the same roof, raising Ellie with love and learning, day by day, to handle the differences that had once seemed like insurmountable barriers. On a sunny spring morning, Amara walked through the auditorium of a newly inaugurated community center. On the walls, posters announced free job training courses for single mothers and domestic workers. Brandon was on stage, adjusting the microphone, while Ellie ran down the aisle carrying a balloon. "Are you ready for your speech?" Amara asked with a smile as she approached. Brandon looked at her with tenderness. "If you're by my side, I'm ready for anything." The event began and he spoke to an attentive audience. This project was born from a very personal story. Some time ago, my life and my daughter's life changed because of someone who taught me that family is not defined by blood, status, or conventions, but by presence, love, and devotion. As he spoke, Amara looked at the women in the audience. Some held their children in their arms, others took notes as if they were mapping out a path to a better future. When Brandon finished his speech, it was Amara who took the microphone. "I know the weight of working hard without being seen. I know what it's like to shelve dreams because life demands bigger payments. But I also know that when someone believes in you, it's possible to change everything. And today we are here to say, you are not alone." Applause echoed through the hall. Ellie ran to them, hugging them both at once. Brandon and Amara looked at each other, and there was no doubt they had found a home in one another. At the end of the event, as the sun set and painted the sky in gold, Brandon whispered in her ear, "You are the reason this all exists," she smiled, squeezing his hand. "And you are the proof that true love sees no labels or barriers. It only recognizes who is there when we needed it most." There, among the hum of voices and the laughter of children, they knew their story had only just begun. So, what did you think of this story? I'd really love to know your opinion. Leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments on how much you enjoyed it. If this story touched you in any way, like the video, share it with someone special, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next ones. And before you go, I've set aside another moving story that I'm sure will touch your heart even more.